if you say to yourself, well, I want every single brand to have a home run signature program. I want every single brand to have a home run social purpose. I mean, give me a break.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
How do you create purpose-driven branding? Attaching your brand to a purpose or a social cause can be a powerful tool, but how do you actually do it effectively? In today's episode, we're talking to a legend within this subject, David Aaker. David Aaker is the Vice President at Prophet and has been hailed as the father of modern branding. Aaker has authored and published hundreds of articles and 18 books, and the latest one is called The Future of Purpose-Driven Branding. His books have been translated into 18 languages and sold over 1 million copies, and have offered guidance and inspiration to marketing leadership at many of the world's leading brands. In today's episode, we wanted to really drill down into what purpose-driven marketing means and how brands should approach this. We also asked David if all businesses need a purpose in order to attract the right customer. David shared some really good nuggets on brands and brand purpose, and he even offered a free ebook to you, our listeners. After you've listened to this episode, make sure to grab your copy on the link in the episode summary. All right, let's get into the interview. David, before we start on brand purpose, one of the things we always like to do here on Scratch is ask the guests a few questions just about how you see the world. One of the things I'd love to start with is, what are you most curious about right now when it comes to marketing? I imagine some of it may be brand purpose, given the book you've just written, but what stands out to you?
Well, I get sort of focused in whatever I'm writing about, and I think my last two books have really addressed major strategic problems facing all firms, and they're kind of what is going to be the future, and therefore it's the future of branding as well. And I wrote this book on disruptive innovation, owning game-changing subcategories, where I introduced branding into a subject that really hadn't seen branding much. These important books on disruptive innovation don't mention branding at all. And then my last book, the one that's coming out next week, is on the problem of how do you address societal issues if you're motivated to do so as a business. And here again, my role is to introduce branding into a subject in which it's very underleveraged.
Why do you think that is? I think it's intriguing that within the industry, it feels like there's been quite a few conversations that have come in vogue on the idea of brand purpose and societal good. But I think to your point, it feels like no one's really connected that as well as they could or talked about the details underneath it. Why do you think there is that disconnect?
I that's a really good question. I've never thought about it, but the basic reason I think is that the leaders of the strategic and tactical, for that matter, efforts around both disruptive innovation and addressing societal challenges are not branding people. They're not even marketing people. In the disruptive innovation space, they tend to be technology people or strategy people, business strategy, and they're have probably had no exposure to branding, and they're sort of stuck in the 70s when branding was simply tactical, is the PG&E brand management model, where it's completely tactical and delegated to some middle management person, and they didn't get the memo that it's changed, and marketing and branding is now strategic and at the executive table. And then in the case of the social programs and societal challenges, here again, I think the drivers of that intellectually and so on have been economists, or they've been sort of business and society people that are interested in public policy, and they're interested in societal problems and the role of business in solving them. And they don't come from marketing. They certainly don't come from branding. So I think that's the reason that all those books don't mention branding.
And is that what inspired writing the book? Is the need to close that gap between people thinking about societal purpose and people thinking about branding what inspired you, or what started the process for the newest book?
No, it's not. It's the way I write books is for better or worse, is not that way. I wrote a book on disruptive innovation because I discovered in my work in Japan, and looking at beer data, 30 years, there's only 4 times the market share projections changed, and they're all due to new subcategories formed, disruptive innovation. So I sort of discovered disruptive innovation is such a powerful force. So I wrote a book on disruptive innovation. And about 2/3 down through the book, I started looking in the mirror and said, well, all these books, what have I got to offer? And then I kind of realized that what I have to offer is branding. And so that became the sort of the goal of the book and the differentiator of the book and the value add of the book. And the same thing happened in this space. I've been always interested in why and how you do good for society if you're a firm and a business, and what is the rationale and what is the motivation. In almost all my books, I have a chapter on that. And so it's just a subject that so I just went into it and said, why should you do it? And how you should do it? And how would you work? And about 2/3 into the book, I realized, there's hundreds of books on this. What am I going to say that's different? And I realized that, well, branding's pretty important here, and nobody else is talking about it. So my role in this book also is to explain why branding is important and how you do it.
Why do you think there's that disconnect even amongst people who wrote books about it? I think it's intriguing that when we talk about brand purpose, as we alluded to earlier, it feels like the industry has discussed it for quite a while. And the industry definitely is in love with applying branding to certain things. But it feels like, to your point, there's a lot of books that miss that. Is it something that came through an insight from your work that guided you to kind of connect the two, as you mentioned, or was it looking at the industry and trying to close a gap there?
Well, once I got into both of these issues and sort of got waist deep in it, and I really 60 or 70% done of the book, it was becoming clear that to have success in the area, it was really branding was almost indispensable. It was an enabler, and you just had to have a brand. And in the case of the disruptive innovation, you needed to be the exemplar of the subcategory. You need to position the subcategory, not the brand, the subcategory. You need to scale it really fast to be successful, and you had to build barriers. And those are all branding problems. In this social purpose book, it all came to me that it's all about two ways that branding work. One is you got to brand the social program. It's not just a matter of having grants, volunteers, energy goals that are not branded and kind of amorphous. They're aimless. They're the same as every other company. That A doesn't get much impact at the end of the day, and two, it lacks what a brand gives you. A brand guides, a brand inspires, a brand communicates, and all those things are necessary for success of the program. So that's one thing. The second way a brand comes into the occasion, Michael Porter and Professor Kramer at Harvard wrote a famous article 10 years ago in which they said that, you need to have shared value. You need to have a brand that helps society, but also helps a business. And they said you can do that by, building windmills or growing organic food, you can change your business to do that, or you can enjoy some cost reduction because you use less energy or something. And they even said you could coalesce your factories and offices in an area and help the community. But they really missed the real value of that. It's to elevate the brand of the business. You give it energy. I mean, these businessmen, you're making bar soap, there's no way to get energy. But if you build a program called Help a Child Reach 5, you have enormous energy. You get 3 videos that Lifebuoy did to support that program got 44 million views. So you get energy, and you get an energy lift. You look at what Goldman Sachs did with their 10,000 Women program to train women entrepreneurs in the third world and give them access to capital. And that's done a lot for the image of Goldman. It really shows that Goldman has a heart, that it can apply their resources to do good in a remarkable way. And finally, you can engage your employees, your customers, your other stakeholders. And as we know in marketing and branding so well, the whole heart of the business is the loyalty of the customers, and that's driven by a brand. And so you have a company like Thrivent, which is a large financial services company, and they adopted Habitat for Humanity as a signature program back in 2005, and since then they have had an outlet for their employees and customers. They have these action teams that go all over the world building homes under Habitat for Humanity. They've got a sub-brand called Thrivent Builds. And just think of the loyalty and the affinity for Thrivent and for Habitat, for that matter, that this outlet for their 2 million sort of Thrivent members that and their families, what that generates. So anyway, so you have the brand has to be on the program. They have to understand they need signature programs that are branded, and they have to use that brand to help a business brand, to give it energy, image lift, and a connection. And that is and was missing.
Prior to this conversation with David, we were curious about how brand purpose works in industries that are inherently negative. Can all brands have a purpose? Or can you adopt a purpose regardless of what you're selling and what services you provide? We asked David about this, and here's what he had to say.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if you saw it and that prompted your question, but there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that was critical of Unilever and suggested they were wasting money chasing purpose and they should get back to the fundamentals of their business. And I wrote a blog that it's just went up last few days at davidaker.com, in which I made some observations about that article and in the premise. And basically, you take a brand at Unilever like Dove. They developed in 2003 the Real Beauty program, and adjacent to that, it was the Self-Esteem program for teen girls. But the Real Beauty program is not. I mean, it's not a matter of them stopping the Real Beauty program and doing the fundamentals of the business. The Real Beauty program is the business. It's the core. It's the body of the business strategy. Without the business strategy, without the Real Beauty program, there would be no business strategy. So it's not a matter of sort of sticking to your knitting. That is the knitting, and you look at what that's done. They over the 20 years they've ridden that wave. They've they've doubled sales and from 2.4 million to over 4 billion, and it's just amazing. I mean, they've had a dozen different campaigns within this. One of them called Sketches got 75 million YouTube viewers alone. And another one called Evolution got $150 million worth of free advertising. I mean, this is basically a bar soap and some deodorant and stuff. It was a bar soap that was based on moisturizer. Now they make deodorant for which moisturizing isn't even relevant. And so if somebody wants them to go back to basics, what would that be? So anyway, and then if you look at Unilever, they got 400 brands. They've got a brand portfolio. And if you say to yourself, well, I want every single brand to have a home run signature program. I want every single brand to have a home run social purpose. I mean, give me a break. If you create a financial portfolio, if you have a portfolio in which every single stock was a home run or at least above average, you've probably got a wrong portfolio. You probably have not taken enough risks in that portfolio. So it's unrealistic to have every single brand be a Dove or a Lifebuoy or Hellman's or somebody that has hit a home run. And that's one thing. The second thing is you have, they're patient with their products. They have a product called Axe that was the sort of the poster child for, somebody that is sort of two-faced. They're talking about Dove and self-esteem, and then Axe is tearing down women. And so what Unilever did was to say, okay, we got 400 brands. We're going to take 26 of them and call these are, sustainable life brands or whatever they used term was. So it was they had a status, these 26 brands, and they grow that every year, that number. And Axe wasn't one of them. But over time, Axe is sitting there sort of being uncomfortable in the corporation. They're uncomfortable. They got no support for what they were doing. And they didn't throw them out. They didn't sell them off, but they made them uncomfortable. And suddenly they woke up and they said, you know something? This isn't working so well anymore. I mean, people aren't, they're not having a lot of humorous fun with the idea that, we can attract women by putting on the right deodorant and they'll just fall over us and attack us. And it's sort of the joke wasn't funny anymore. And so they said, well, we have to, we should change. And by the way, if we did that, the executive suite at Unilever would feel better about us. That's not all bad. And so they changed the thrust of Axe to be one of achieving your potential, whatever it is, to be you, but to be the best you. And that was sort of their new mission. And after that got traction, and they dumped all the stuff they were doing, they joined this elite group of brands at Unilever. They earned that status. So their social purpose became help people achieve the best they can be, kind of thing. But let me say a word about purpose. People argue that if you have a social purpose, you're going to dilute your main business. And so there's two things about purpose that I need to say. One is that if you don't have to do that, there's a lot of companies that do that. Legos does it well. There's other companies, and but if you can't create a business purpose that provides an umbrella making social programs acceptable in your company, then you have a stand by side social purpose. So Salesforce has a business purpose. We connect people, and they have a social purpose. The software for good kind of stuff. The nonprofit cloud, the sustainability cloud, and so on. And so anyway, they have two side-by-side purposes, a social purpose and a business purpose. And so that gives the social program status, and it also gives them a permission to go there, and it doesn't detract from the business purpose. The other thing I would say about purpose, we've you know this as well as I do, boys, that worked with brand and brand strategy. If you can create, I used to call it a brand identity, or brand vision, or brand pillars, or brand principles, or whatever you want to call it, what your brand stands for aspirationally. If you can get that right with the right label, it's total magic. I mean, you can drive the company, you can drive the relationships, you can drive the brand. You know, like a good example. There's a lot of good examples, but the Haas Berkeley Business School in California created these 4 principles. One of which is a confidence without attitude. It's so differentiating. It made that business school charge up the world map. Everybody's envious of it because it really got something that clicked. It is not easy to do that, and sometimes you can spend weeks or months. Sometimes you spend years before you find something that really clicks. And in the meantime, you've got something that's basically not doing any harm, but it's not doing any good. It's all ignored. It's not magic. It's not inspiring. It's not guiding. And so this illusion that you either have a purpose or you don't have a purpose is just not the way reality is. It's a spectrum. You can have a great magic purpose, or you can have a purpose that doesn't do anything, and you have no purpose, which is about the same. And so it's not a matter of saying, let's have a purpose. We'll go to, an organization like, ours or yours, and find magic. It's not so easy.
I love that point you raise. Purpose is less of a decision and more of a force that drives brands to adapt sometimes, to the Axe example. I guess one of the things I would be curious to get your opinion on is we've talked a lot about brand purpose, and right there we talked about good brands, just good brand fundamentals and good brand understanding. Do you feel the role of brand is changing over time, or the role of a good brand and the structure of a good brand has changed, or is it timeless and we're just talking about it in new ways?
Oh, that's a good question. And lies behind it is how brands and brand management has changed over the last 30, 50 years. So that has got something to do about it. It's been a really spectacular change from the Procter & Gamble tactical management to this now CMO or VP of marketing seat at the executive table, and the knowledge that strategy is intertwined with branding. So there's that. And of course, that memo hasn't gotten to everybody yet. There's still people that don't accept that, or they don't get it, and so there's that journey we're still on. And then there's, of course, all the tactical stuff around digital stuff. The digital is accelerated disruptive innovation, and it changed the ability to scale. It's changed the ability for a brand to get into the e-commerce or something, get into getting people access to them, and communicating with social and websites and so on. So that tactical stuff has affected strategy as well. And so there are those changes, but there's a lot of fundamentals that are the same.
It's such an interesting point you raise. It's like there's a book called The Successful Exposition of Advertising from 1890. And I used to read it to junior planners and cover up the bits that would give them a hint that it was over 100 years old. And if you take the channels out and you swap things like telegraph for social media, obviously there's some elements and tactics that change, but it was interesting that a lot of it still rang true. And I tend to agree with you that you go, the wider strategy and foundations are pretty timeless, but the way they're being applied, the way that we apply them to the game that is marketing and persuasion changes.
So yeah, it comes back to creating the product. Phil Kotler always said that the definition of marketing is making selling unnecessary. So you create the right product, but then you have to communicate it and you have to distribute it.
I guess there's an interesting point there. I'd love to know more about, because the Kotler definition of kind of selling the unnecessary. How do we think that mixes with an age of social purpose, an age of conscious consumerism? Does it need to change, or is it just an uncomfortable combination in today's society?
No, I think it comes back to doing what people want done. And so there's you know, there's an important constituency, and that's employees. Employees really insist that you do something that make money for shareholders. And they even want you to do something more than make insanely great products. That's not enough for them, especially Gen Z, even millennials. They won't work, they won't join, or they won't stay at a firm that doesn't have a different attitude, that doesn't have a social purpose. It doesn't have effective, so it doesn't allow them to to do something for society. So therefore, if you're running a business strategically, you need to factor in that thing. There's also customers, and to varying amount, but it doesn't take very many customers to make the difference between struggling and thriving. 10% of the marketplace can make that difference. So even though they might be small in relative numbers, they can still be influential. So so again, I think that it's we can be doing social good and still sort of fulfilling our goal of creating a viable enterprise. But there's one other element, and that is that business need to be leaders. And it's not only a matter of figuring out where employees are, where customers are, and then following them and sort of acceding to their demands. The companies have to be leaders, and it's easy to be discouraged today about the politics, the rise of autocratic governments, and the polarization, the paralyzation, and one bright spot. It's really incredible what private companies are doing for climate change, for social good. It's just, and for diversity. It's just amazing. And it's really hard to find a company, even small companies, of a few hundred people or a few dozen people. They're really doing something useful, and over time, this motivation and this energy is productive. They're really making a difference. They're making a difference to climate change. Amazing, and so they're really behaving like leaders. And it's like Benioff and the people at Unilever and the people at Patagonia are not the only ones. They're out in front, but they're not the only ones. It's really across the board. You have Goldman Sachs, you have Walmart. Walmart for 10 years has done the most amazing things, and they weren't there 10 years ago.
I love the point you raised there, because I think, to your point, there's an expectation of leadership on a lot of marketers and private organizations nowadays, and a lot of push to claim the benefits that we've talked about from a strong brand purpose. How would you advise marketers listening to this to start? Because I imagine there's a real push to want to save the world on day one, to want to be Patagonia. But I imagine that's quite a high bar to set. So what would be your advice to start on that journey for a marketer listening?
first of all, it really the importance of the CEO can't be underestimated. CEOs um, have such a key role here. If you look at the Unilevers, the leaders in the world, um, and all the CEOs of their brands, and Patagonia, the CEO is really the driver, the inspiration, the people that's building that culture. So there's that. But what I would advise is to create a signature brand, to really a signature social program, and really focus on trying to find something that works for you. It would be really great if it's something that employs your assets and resources and is compatible with your offering, or at least your marketplace. But it that's not necessary. You can make a commitment and involvement just through fundraising and through intellectual and support. And you look at Avon Walk for breast cancer or something, and that was their signature program, and it had nothing to do with their products or anything. But so I would look for signature programs, because you'll end up with doing something that'll have more impact, and B, you'll do something that will help your own brand, which will give you money and market share and all the rest of it. But more important, it will support the program. I don't know if it's more important, but it will. And you talked about a flywheel. If you get something that'll help the business will then be motivated, and it won't even have to be asked. It's going to support that program with an endorsement, with resources, and involvement.
So when you're speaking about signature programs, something that came to mind was, how do you actually go about finding the right fit for your company? Does it have to be strictly related to what your business does, or can you just choose wildly?
Oh, that's really a good question. I was at the board of an insurance company, and we looked for 10 years for a signature program. We never could really find one, because we had a broad array of customers, and we could find one that was relevant to each of those customer bases, but we couldn't find one that spanned them. And God, we tried. And so we're doing all these, $10,000 grants every year, and to people that wrote in, and it nothing. And so, but we did end up creating about 4 or 5 signature programs that were oriented toward a customer base. And so it helped our brand with those customers, and they were modest, but so if you put 4 or 5 of them together, they ended up making a difference. Like we had a program to rebuild the kitchen in schools for the teachers use, because teachers was a big thing. And for the police, which was another big deal customer, we provide teddy bears that patrolmen could give to kids in accidents. And so anyway, and we branded both those programs. And so anyway, that's one route. But another a strange source of signature programs often comes from some spark within the organization. Maybe the CEO or maybe something else had an incident. They ran into a homeless person, and something triggered them. We got to do something about that. And they got involved in a nonprofit, or they got started themselves doing something, and that fire within the company can explode. And suddenly it's a signature program. At Barclays, they had a trust problem once, and they started a social purpose-led set of programs. One of them was a Digital Eagles, where people would help people understand the digital world, old elderly people and youngsters and so forth. They started with 7 employees. They now have 17,000 doing that. And that's nothing to do with their bank, or just at all, really. But it was a germ of an idea that just grew, and everybody was attracted to it. And it was something that needed doing. Nobody else was doing it. They had the expertise. They could They had a bunch of people that understood computers and entertainment systems, and they could go out there and help. And but that's a really good question. I have a chapter in the book. How do you find your signature story? Not signature story, a signature program.
The signature program and the openness you speak about there is so intriguing. I know one of the things we've always thought about brands is successful brands are open to the world. And I think the build you've had there of the CEO especially being a kind of spark in social change is interesting. If both the organization and the leadership of that organization and the brand understand what's going on in the world around them and understand how they want to interact with it. I think it's an intriguing point on brand openness and understanding that your role may change and that it may need to interact with the wider world and marketplace.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about this before, but it does suggest that having a CEO that is sort of externally oriented and has a feel for employees and the market and the customers is probably a good thing.
It's so true. I think it's always struck us that in a lot of the brand work that we've done, the consumer is always trying to lead you somewhere. The world is always trying to lead you somewhere. It's just, are we able to listen, or are we able to follow where they want us to go? And I think it's an intriguing point that the leadership as well needs to be open to that, to understand the forces that want to pull them in certain directions and understand how the brand or the company can adapt to that. One other thing I'd be curious about, just thinking about kind of the question we ask a lot of guests, and I'd love to know, is when we think about modern marketing, is this an addition to the way modern marketing exists, or is the idea of increased purpose something that's going to rewrite the rules of modern marketing in your mind?
Oh, I never, nobody asked me about what the future of marketing. They asked Phil Kotler that. They asked me what's the future of branding. And so that's a little bit beyond my pay grade. But I think it has to be part of the future of marketing for sure, because of all these forces. The fact that we've got these social problems now that are scary. I mean, or they're serious and they're affecting everything. And so we have to get involved, and we can get involved because we have the agility, we have the resources, we have the know-how, and our employees and others demand it. And actually, our business often needs the energy lift and the image lift that it'll give.
So true. One thing I'd be curious about, building on our conversation about purpose and business growth, is obviously at the moment we're looking at quite an economic downturn in a lot of markets across the world. And I think there's a challenge sometimes for marketers especially to assume that when economic times are tough, when price becomes more sensitive, we have to boil back what we do. Do you see the role of purpose in consumers' minds and society changing as the economy has a downturn, or do you feel it's still as important as it is now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess it'll probably recede a little it's Maslow's law, right? It is when you have to get if you can't feed and house you or somebody you know or some relative, that becomes more important than anything. And so I think that's going to be a challenge to keep the focus on these major things that are too easily de-emphasized when you have that. So that's definitely an issue, I think. So then it comes back to leadership, and that's all the more important. This idea that making sure these social programs actually enhance the business instead of detract to them, because if they're a dead weight financially, they're very vulnerable.
I think it's such an intriguing point there that if you can make them valuable to the business, then they can survive a downturn. And I think Yeah, as you were speaking, one of the things that struck me is there's probably such an opportunity for marketers over the next 12 to 18 months to help maintain the progress in certain causes that consumers care about. As times get tougher, I think we tend to trade off a lot of things. You look at sustainability during COVID, the idea that single-use plastic came roaring back, or the idea that environmentalism during an economic downturn is going to be harder to pay for sustainable things. And I think to your point about brand leadership, if brands can step in and make it work for them, but also make it work for consumers to maintain that progress, that feels like such a powerful opportunity in kind of what could be a tough period that's upcoming. One thing we ask everyone at the end of the program would be, if there was one thing you wanted listeners to take away from this, one thing you wanted them to know from the conversation we had today, what would it be?
Well, my sort of goal for almost 3 decades is try to get people to understand branding, to use branding in their business, and to make it a strategic thing. And I think have made a small bit of progress in that. And I still feel that way, but I really, as I said at the outset, I was really stunned when I came to realization, both in the disruptive innovation book, the subcategory book, and in this latest book, the future purpose-driven branding, that these two major, they must be the two most important strategic issues facing a lot of businesses. That brand has been absent for all these major books. I mean, in both cases, you got 100 books, and branding is almost absent, and yet branding is so important in each of those arenas.
It's so true, and quite a powerful point. I'm really looking forward to reading it, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm quite a fan of your work. So I think it'll be an intriguing read and an incredibly useful one, because I think at the moment we're doing quite a lot of work on purpose. So I think figuring out the best way to push that forward, make it necessary, and make it kind of valuable, as you say, is really key.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.